All right, so we're diving into some pretty big news in the photography world today. Getty Images and Shutterstock, two giants in the stock photo industry, are merging. And we know you're particularly interested in how this impacts the photographers who've kind of built these platforms up, right?
Yeah, it's like this whole story just kind of highlights this bigger trend, where you have all these individual creators pouring their work into these platforms, and then suddenly there are these major business decisions that like totally impact their livelihoods.
It really does feel like the photographers are the foundation of these companies, but then they don't seem to be directly benefiting from this billion-dollar deal.
Right.
So let's break it down a little. Getty Images is basically buying Shutterstock, right?
Yeah.
For $3.7 billion, which creates this combined company that's also valued at $3.7 billion.
Wow.
And Getty Images shareholders, they'll hold the majority stake, something like 54%,
Okay.
leaving Shutterstock shareholders with, around 45%.
Makes sense. It's interesting, though, that the merged company is going to operate under the Getty Images name and use their stock ticker, GDE, and Craig Peters, the CEO of Getty Images, he's going to be leading the whole thing.
Yeah. I was wondering about that, why they're keeping the Getty Images branding and all. I guess both CEOs are, they're saying all the usual stuff about the benefits of merging. Like they're talking about these massive combined content libraries and, of course, more diverse product offerings. And, a stronger financial position to, invest in all this new tech, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and that last part is, I think, super key. They keep emphasizing the rapid rise in demand for visual content, but they're also kind of hinting at this underlying need to compete in a world where AI is becoming more and more important.
Right. That brings us to the real question here, right?
That's
What
right.
happens to all the photographers? I mean, we found this Reddit post from a photojournalist who basically makes a living off both platforms.
Yeah,
And they were really worried. And it seems like a lot of photographers are feeling the same way.
definitely.
Like what happens to their rates, their visibility, their future in general.
It's a good question. And to be honest, the fact that neither company has really said anything concrete about photographer compensation, I think that's what's fueling a lot of the anxiety. Some analysts are even predicting that this merger could like trigger this race to the bottom when it comes to licensing fees as the new mega company tries to, squeeze out as much profit as possible.
It's almost like the photographers are just forgotten in all of this, even though they're the ones who provide the content that makes these platforms valuable in the first place.
It's true. I mean, it's such a classic example of that tension between the business side of things and the creative side, right? Right now, all the focus seems to be on the financial gains for shareholders and making sure the company is in a good position for the future. But there's not a lot of talk about the individuals who, actually made it all possible.
Yeah, and that disconnect is pretty worrying. We see projections for 150 to $200 million in annual cost savings within 3 years, and earnings and cash flow are supposed to get a boost starting in year 2. But where's all that coming from?
Right. Are they going to start paying photographers less? It's a valid question, especially if the combined company is looking to cut costs. You can't help but wonder if photographer commissions might be the first thing on the chopping block.
And then there's this whole elephant in the room thing,
Yeah.
the AI thing. It feels like the rise of these AI image generators like Midjourney and Delhi is a big reason why this merger is even happening.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these AI systems, they need massive amounts of data to learn and create images. And the combined Getty Images and Shutterstock libraries, it's like a gold mine, right? A
Wow.
gold mine for AI training.
And kind of wild to think about, right?
Yeah.
On one hand, they see AI as this potential new revenue stream. They're going to be licensing AI-generated images.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, there's this very real fear that AI could just replace human photographers altogether. It's a double-edged sword for sure.
It really is. It's like we're watching this technological disruption happen in real time, right? And the landscape of photography is shifting, and the future is uncertain for, a lot of people whose livelihoods depend on it.
Yeah. And then there's the whole legal side of this merger,
Wow.
too. There's all this talk about the U.S. government looking into the deal from an antitrust perspective.
Oh, right. TechCrunch had a big article about that, how regulators are worried about this merger creating a dominant force in the stock photography market. And if there's that much consolidation, it could really stifle competition and potentially harm those smaller players in the industry.
And then imagine what that would mean for all the photographers who rely on those smaller platforms, right?
Exactly.
Fewer options, less leverage to negotiate, potentially even lower rates and just fewer opportunities overall.
It's a ripple effect, and it could have a huge impact. It's going to be important to see how those antitrust regulators approach this merger and what kind of conditions they might impose to, try and maintain a somewhat competitive market.
This whole thing feels like a high-stakes game,
Yeah.
and the photographers are stuck right in the middle.
Absolutely. On one side, you've got the disruptive force of AI, and on the other, this massive consolidation of power.
It's like a perfect storm.
Yeah.
But one thing is definitely clear. This merger is like a turning point for stock photography. Kind of a microcosm of what's happening in a lot of industries, right? Technology is shaking things up, companies are getting bigger and bigger, and individuals are just trying to figure out how to, navigate this whole rapidly changing world.
And for photographers, especially those who rely on Getty Images and Shutterstock, it's a call to action. They need to stay informed, adapt to these new dynamics, and maybe even start thinking about new ways to do their work.
Right. It's not about giving into fear, but finding ways to, thrive.
Yeah.
Maybe this will even spark some new innovation, right? New platforms and ways of doing business that'll give photographers more control.
Right. It could be a catalyst for something really positive. But photographers need to be proactive. They need to advocate for themselves and make their voices heard. This is where the power of community is really important.
Absolutely. By coming together, sharing information, and just supporting each other, photographers can navigate this uncertainty and hopefully work towards a more sustainable and, equitable future for their craft.
Well said. That's a powerful message to remember as we continue this deep dive.
Speaking of which, when we come back, let's dig into this whole AI thing a bit more. We need to really understand how it might reshape the world of stock photography, especially for the photographers whose work is, literally at stake.
Okay, let's do it.
Don't go anywhere. Okay, so we're back, and it's like time to really tackle this whole AI thing head on. It's a little daunting, I'll be honest. But we need to understand how it might, completely reshape the world of stock photography, especially for the photographers whose, literal work is on the line here.
Right. And I think it's easy to get caught up in all the hype and fear surrounding AI. It's often portrayed as this big disruptive force, a threat to everything we know. But I think we need to unpack what that actually means, in the specific context of stock photography.
Exactly. Let's not just throw around buzzwords.
Yeah.
We keep hearing about these AI image generators, like Midjourney and Deli. So for those who aren't totally familiar, could you explain what they actually are and why photographers should care?
Sure. So imagine, right, you can just type in any description like a cat wearing a top hat riding a unicycle on the moon. And within seconds, boom, the AI generates a photorealistic image that matches your description perfectly.
Wow.
That's the power of these tools. They're trained on these massive data sets of images, right? And they learn to create new ones based on all the patterns and styles they've absorbed.
So it's in a way, these AI systems are learning from the very work that photographers have, slaved over and uploaded to platforms like Getty Images and Shutterstock.
That's the irony, isn't it? All this work, all this creativity that photographers have poured their hearts and souls into, and now it's being used to train AI systems that could potentially put them out of business.
Yeah, it's kind of unsettling, to be honest.
Right.
It feels a little unfair, even. I mean, these photographers, they didn't explicitly say, hey, use my photos to train an AI. It raises all sorts of questions about, copyright, ownership, and just the ethics of all this AI training stuff.
You're hitting on some really crucial points there. The legal and ethical implications of using copyrighted images to train AI, it's a huge debate right now. And I think this merger could actually accelerate those discussions, because now you have this one company with this absolutely massive data set that's just ripe for AI training.
So where does this leave the photographers who depend on stock photography to, pay their bills? Are they just doomed?
I don't think it's quite that dire.
Okay, good.
I mean, yeah, AI definitely poses a challenge, right? But it also presents an opportunity. I think it's all about adapting and figuring out how to leverage these new technologies to your advantage.
That sounds good in theory, but how can photographers realistically compete with an AI that can just pump out images on demand, potentially for way less money?
Well, one approach is to specialize, at least for now. AI is really good at generating generic images, those broadly appealing ones, but it still struggles with really niche subjects
Mm.
or unique perspectives. And, those images that require a deep understanding of a specific feel or topic.
So it's like instead of trying to compete head on with AI, photographers could like carve out these niches where human creativity and like real expertise are still valuable, right?
Exactly. Think about like specialized scientific photography or images that capture specific cultural nuances or portraits that like convey genuine emotion. AI isn't there yet.
Yeah, that's actually pretty reassuring. But I mean, what about the argument that like AI could eventually get so good that it can replicate even those specialized types of photography?
Yeah, it's a valid concern, but even then, I think human photographers will still have a crucial role to play. Like, they can use AI as a tool, like a collaborator almost,
Oh, interesting.
to like enhance their workflow, experiment with different styles, and just push the boundaries of their creativity. It's not about replacing humans, but augmenting them.
I like that. It's about like embracing the possibilities, not just freaking out about the, potential downsides.
Exactly. Imagine like a photographer using AI to generate some initial concepts or ideas, right?
Yeah.
And then they take those and refine them, elevate them with their own unique artistic vision. It becomes this fusion of human and machine creativity.
It's a cool concept, but
Right.
let's be real, this kind of transition isn't going to be easy for everyone. A lot of photographers might struggle to adapt, especially those who've, built their careers on the traditional models of stock photography.
Oh, for sure. And that's why I think it's so important for photographers to start thinking about these changes now. Like, now is the time to explore new platforms, experiment with AI tools, and just connect with other photographers, share knowledge, support each other.
There's that community aspect again.
Always. This isn't the time to isolate yourself. It's the time to connect, collaborate, and learn from each other. It's the only way to move forward.
Man, this conversation has been like a total roller coaster ride.
Right.
We've talked about the potential doom and gloom of AI,
Right.
but we've also uncovered some pretty exciting possibilities. I think what I'm taking away from all this is that, like, the future of photography isn't set in stone.
Yeah.
It's being shaped right now, and photographers have a voice in that process.
That's so important to remember. It's not about passively waiting to see what happens. It's about actively engaging, experimenting, and just pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Well said. All right, so before we wrap up this whole deep dive, I want to shift our focus back to the merger itself. Let's talk about its potential impact on the bigger picture of the stock photography market. Like, what could this mean for smaller players, for pricing, and ultimately for all of the photographers who depend on these platforms to, make a living?
Yeah, let's get into it. This is where things get real because the consolidation of power in the stock photography industry, that raises some really important questions that we need to address.
Okay, so let's dive into those questions right after the break. Don't go anywhere. All right, so we're back. And it's like time to zoom out a little bit. We've talked a lot about the photographers themselves, but what about the bigger picture here? How might this Getty Images Shutterstock merger shake up the entire stock photography market?
It's like, you think about it like an ecosystem, right? This merger creates this giant, and we have to think about what that means for all the other, creatures in that ecosystem. Like,
Mm.
what happens to all the smaller stock photography companies? Do they get like squeezed out?
Right. And what about pricing? Could this merger make stock photos more expensive for people who need to buy them?
Yeah.
Or I guess the other side of that coin is, could it actually drive prices down so low that it's impossible for photographers to actually make a living?
Yeah, those are all valid concerns. I mean,
Yeah.
one thing that could happen is that this merger like triggers even more consolidation in the industry.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because like the smaller companies, they might just not be able to compete with the sheer volume and resources of this combined Getty Shutterstock beast.
Right.
So we could see more mergers, maybe even some companies closing down altogether.
So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Yeah, exactly.
This merger creates this giant, which then makes it harder for smaller players to survive, which leads to more consolidation.
Exactly. It's like this snowball effect.
Yeah.
And, that lack of competition, that can have some pretty serious consequences when it comes to pricing, both for the buyers and the sellers.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, on the buyer side, less competition usually means higher prices
Okay. Yeah.
because if there are fewer options available, buyers don't really have as much leverage to negotiate, to get better deals.
So businesses, publishers, anyone who uses stock photos regularly, they could end up paying more.
Exactly. And then, flip it around to the seller side.
Yeah.
the pressure to cut costs and, maximize those profits, it could easily lead to like lower commissions for photographers.
So it's like a squeeze from both ends.
Totally.
Buyers are paying more, photographers are earning less, and the big merged company, they're just like raking it in.
It's classic, right? I mean, it's a perfect example of how consolidation can sometimes benefit those big corporations while like kind of screwing over both the consumers and the individual creators.
It's kind of a bummer, to be honest. But I guess, it does highlight how important those antitrust regulations are. Like if the regulators see this merger as potentially harmful to competition, they could, step in and impose some conditions or even like block the whole deal.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how that all plays out. I mean, antitrust laws, they're designed to prevent monopolies and, protect consumers and all that. But in this digital age where it's all about platforms and data, it's not always so clear cut,
Yeah, it feels like uncharted territory in a lot of ways. I mean, this merger, it's not just about two companies coming together. It's about the future of like a whole industry.
And it's about the livelihoods of like countless photographers who've, poured their heart and soul into building these platforms.
It's a good reminder that even in this world that feels so dominated by algorithms and big data, it's like the human element, the creative spark that's still at the heart of it all.
Totally. And it's that human element that we need to keep front and center as we, try to navigate all this.
Absolutely. So to wrap things up here, let's, bring it back to you, the listener.
Yeah.
What can you do, right,
Mm-hmm.
in the face of all this uncertainty?
Well, first and foremost, I'd say stay informed. Keep up with the news, read what the experts are saying, and, talk to other photographers. Get a sense of how the landscape is shifting.
Knowledge is power, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, don't be afraid to adapt. Explore those new platforms, play around with those AI tools, and just think creatively about how to, like, stand out in a crowded market.
And, I mean, we've said it before, but it's worth repeating.
Yeah.
Don't underestimate the power of community.
Yeah.
Connect with other photographers, share resources, support each other. Like, that's where real change happens.
Couldn't agree more.
This whole merger thing, it might feel like this giant wave,
Mhm.
just crashing over the stock photography world. But remember, even the biggest waves, they eventually recede. And what they leave behind is like this reshaped landscape, right? With new opportunities and new challenges.
It's about learning how to ride that wave, not letting it, sweep you away.
Perfectly said. So to our listener, we leave you with this. Stay curious, stay engaged, and never stop creating. The future of photography, it's in your hands.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a wild ride.
Until next time, keep shooting.